Iran, with its long history and profound influence in the Middle East, is not only prominent in modern politics, but also mentioned in many biblical prophecies. In prophetic books such as Ezekiel and Daniel, Iran appears as a powerful and important nation in God's plan, with its ancient names of Media and Persia. These prophecies not only reflect Iran's role in history, but also provide valuable lessons for us about justice, judgment, and hope for salvation. Through the prophecies, we learn that God not only sees nations by what they presently show, but also sees the hearts and futures of each people. Iran, whether in times of prosperity or decline, has not escaped God's special care. The prophecies about Iran in the Bible remind us that, regardless of the nation, it can receive restoration and salvation when it turns to God. Number 1. Cyrus and the miraculous restoration of Israel. Cyrus the Great is one of those extraordinary figures in the Bible, a man who was not of Israelite descent, but who was used by God as a divine instrument to carry out the plan of Israel's restoration. The story of Cyrus and his role in the restoration of the Jewish people is not only a historical event, but also a testament to the power of God, a reminder that His divine plans are never limited by a person's nationality or background. Cyrus, God's divine instrument. The prophecy of Isaiah, written more than a century before Cyrus's birth, is one of the clearest demonstrations of God's intervention in human history. In Isaiah 44:28, there is a special prophecy about a shepherd who would help Israel, but the miracle is that he is not an Israelite, but a foreign king. Cyrus, Isaiah 44:28 says, "He is my shepherd, and he will do all that I desire. He will say to Jerusalem, 'You shall be rebuilt, and your temple shall be restored.'" This is a powerful prophecy of the restoration of Israel, and what is remarkable is that this king is not a Jew, but someone from a foreign empire, in this case, Cyrus the Great. Usually it is thought that the restoration of the nation and the temple must be carried out by an Israelite. Still, through Cyrus, God demonstrates that He can use anyone to accomplish His plan, regardless of whether that person is of God's chosen people. The decree of Cyrus and the restoration of Israel. One of the most critical events in the restoration of Israel was the decree of Cyrus in 539 BC. After conquering Babylon and ascending the throne, Cyrus did not continue the oppressive policies that previous empires had practiced against the Jews. Instead, he issued a special decree allowing the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. In the book of Ezra, we read the words of Cyrus. "Cyrus, king of Persia, said, 'The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and He has commanded me to build His house in Jerusalem, in Judah.'" This was not simply a political decision by a foreign king to maintain peace in his empire. It was a wonderful fulfillment of a prophecy that God had given to the Jewish people, showing that God used Cyrus as an instrument to carry out part of His plan to redeem Israel. Although a pagan king, Cyrus was used by God to help restore the Jewish people and rebuild their places of worship. The spiritual significance and leadership of Cyrus. Cyrus not only provided material and political support for the restoration of Israel, he also indirectly fulfilled the prophecies that the previous prophets had proclaimed. This demonstrates that God can use any situation, any person, whether foreign or Israelite, to carry out His divine plan. The story of Cyrus and the restoration of Israel is an essential lesson for us. It reminds us that God can work through anyone, and nothing is too complicated for Him. God can work through those who are not part of His chosen people, or through circumstances that we think are impossible. It is important that we always trust in God's guidance and be willing to be His instruments. Cyrus and God's love for Israel. The story of Cyrus is also a testament to God's boundless love for the people of Israel. Even though the Jews were in exile and oppressed, God did not abandon them. He kept His promise and used a foreign king to open up the opportunity for their restoration. This is a reminder of God's patience and faithfulness, a faithfulness that never changes. A lesson for us today: the story of Cyrus the Great is not only valuable in history, but it also holds profound lessons for us today. First, we learn that God's restoration and plans can come from places we least expect. Whether it's in difficult circumstances or when we feel abandoned, God always has unexpected ways to accomplish His work. Second, this story reminds us that God can use anyone to accomplish His work. Cyrus, a foreigner, was used by God as an instrument to fulfill prophecy and restore Israel. This shows that no matter who we are, if we open our hearts and let God lead us, He will use us to accomplish His great plan. Finally, the story of Cyrus also teaches us about God's patience and faithfulness. Even though the people of Israel endured many years of exile, God kept His promise and restored them. Likewise, God does not abandon us, no matter how difficult our trials may be. Let us learn from Cyrus. Even if we are not Jewish or special in the eyes of the world, if we are open to God's guidance, He can use us to do His great work on this earth. Number 2, Darius and the restoration of the temple, the fulfillment of prophecy. In the history of the people of Israel, the restoration of the temple is one of the most powerful signs of God's intervention in the human world. Under the rule of the Persian Empire, King Darius the Great played a decisive role in fulfilling God's prophecies by supporting and protecting the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem. This is a clear example of how God can use foreign rulers to carry out His plans, and Darius is a prominent figure in this story. When Cyrus, king of Persia, died, rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem seemed interrupted. Opposition and lack of funds were factors that could have delayed the process. However, Darius continued Cyrus's policy and not only protected the construction of the temple, but also directly intervened to ensure that it was completed, God's will. Darius continues Cyrus' policy. When Darius ascended the throne, he inherited a vast and challenging empire. However, rather than allow the construction of the temple to be delayed or stopped, he firmly defended the decree of his predecessor Cyrus, which allowed the Israelites to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. Darius not only granted the permission, but also ordered Persian officials to provide financial support to ensure that the project would not be interrupted. Ezra 6:7-8 records Darius's command, "Let the governor of the Jews and their elders rebuild the house of God in this place. He has commanded me to pay for it from the taxes collected from the land beyond the river." This was not just an administrative decree, but a strong commitment from Darius to this sacred project. Darius directed that the tax revenue from the various regions of his empire, including Syria, Phoenicia, and other lands, be used to finance the construction of the temple. Darius's spiritual recognition. But Darius was not just a foreign king issuing administrative decrees. He also revered the God of Israel and his awareness of His omnipotence. Darius understood that the success of his empire depended not only on military or political power, but also on God's protection and favor. Therefore, he ordered the Israelites to offer sacrifices, to pray for the prosperity and protection of his dynasty and princes. According to Ezra 6:10, Darius commanded, "Let them offer sacrifices to the God of heaven, to pray for the king and his sons." This was an act of humility on the part of the Persian king, as well as an acknowledgement of the importance of God in the lives of individuals and the empire's existence. Darius did not see the temple as a mere blessings came from God. This act of Darius can be seen as a demonstration of his respect for God and his recognition of His infinite power. Although Darius was a pagan king, he did not hesitate to show his recognition of the holiness of the temple and its role in God's plan. The importance of the temple in God's plan. The rebuilding of the temple was not simply a physical structure, but a clear sign of the spiritual restoration and return of the Israelites to God. It was part of the great promise that God had made to the nation, that He would not abandon them despite their trials. The temple symbolized God's presence among his people, where prayers and sacrifices could be offered to seek his forgiveness and blessing. Darius, by upholding Cyrus's decree and protecting the temple, fulfilled a part of God's grand plan for Israel. He was instrumental in not only the physical restoration of the temple, but also the spiritual restoration of the Israelites. This is a testament to the greatness of God, that he can use people and events outside of the Israelites' plans to fulfill his prophecy. Number 3. Rebuilding the Wall of Faith. The story of Nehemiah is a vivid example of the faith and restoration that God brings. Nehemiah was not a soldier fighting in battle or a religious leader, but a cupbearer in the court of King Artaxerxes I, a king of the Persian Empire. Yet, despite his crucial role in a foreign court, Nehemiah's heart was always with his hometown of Jerusalem, where the walls had been destroyed and the city had fallen into ruin. One day, when he heard about the dire state of Jerusalem, Nehemiah could not help but grieve. His heart was filled with thoughts and worries. The walls of the city, the symbol of Israel's protection and safety, had been destroyed, and he felt a great responsibility to restore them. Nehemiah prayed to God, asking him to give him the wisdom and strength to execute a restoration plan. He wanted not only to rebuild the physical walls, but also to restore the hope and faith of the Israelites. When Nehemiah stood before King Artaxerxes, he expressed his concerns. This foreign king, out of his generosity and sense of responsibility to the people of Israel, not only agreed to Nehemiah's request, but also gave him tremendous support. Artaxerxes not only allowed Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, but also gave him the authority to do so with full protection from the army and the necessary resources. The official documents that the king gave Nehemiah would help him pass through other countries on his way back to Jerusalem without encountering any obstacles. Not only that, Artaxerxes also provided Nehemiah with an escort of soldiers, protecting him throughout the dangerous and difficult journey. The king also provided him with material resources, timbers from the royal forest, to help build the city gates and other essential structures. Thus, Nehemiah had everything he needed to complete his mission, and in just 52 days, the walls of Jerusalem were miraculously rebuilt, despite the many challenges. Nehemiah's story is not just a story of the rebuilding of a city, but also a testament to divine intervention in history. The Persian Empire's support of the Israelites was not a simple act of a foreign king, but part of God's grand plan. God used King Artaxerxes, a non-believer, to accomplish his divine purposes for the Israelites. This is a reminder that nothing in history is accidental. Every event is in God's hands, and he can use any means, even from unexpected places, to accomplish his plan. When the wall of Jerusalem was completed, not only was the city protected, but the faith of the Israelites was restored. It was a clear sign of God's intervention, showing that he was with them, no matter what trials they faced. The walls were not just physical structures, but also a symbol of the protection and safety that God provided for his people. Completing this project not only made the Israelites feel more secure, but also served as a reminder that God never abandoned them. Nehemiah's actions and the support of King Artaxerxes also teach us an important lesson about perseverance and faith. Nehemiah not only saw the problem, but also acted to solve it. He prayed to God and then made a clear plan to restore Jerusalem. This is a model for us on how to face the challenges in life, not just asking God for help, but also acting with faith, perseverance, and relentless effort. Nehemiah's story also teaches us that restoration comes not only from human strength, but also from God's intervention. No matter how good our plans are, they will all be meaningless without God's guidance and help. It is God who guides and protects us every step of the way. When we work in trust and by the grace of God, we will see miracles happen, complex works will be completed, and challenges will be overcome. In today's world, Nehemiah's story is not only a history lesson, but also a call for us. We, too, are facing challenges, walls collapsing in our personal, family, and social lives. But if we put our faith in God, pray, and act, He will lead us through every challenge and restore everything that has been lost. We never have to face difficulties alone because God is always by our side, ready to help and protect us. Number 4. The connection between Zoroastrianism and the history of Israel's salvation. In the history of great empires, Persia has profoundly impacted human history, especially in its relationship with the people of Israel. One of the elements that made Persia different was the religion, Zoroastrianism, also known as the religion of Zarathustra, with its special values about the cosmic struggle between good and evil, between Ahura Mainyu, the evil one. It was this opposition that created a different view of the world, as well as of divine power and the intervention of a supreme being in human history. Although Zoroastrianism is not a thoroughly monotheistic religion like Judaism, it still shares some important elements of believing in a supreme God. Ahura Mazda, the supreme God in Zoroastrianism, is not only the model of good, but also the symbol of absolute power. This religion also affirms the freedom of human will, allowing each individual to freely choose between good and evil. Thus, Zoroastrianism developed a very special concept of the relationship between humans and the divine, as well as the involvement of supernatural powers in historical events. For Persian kings such as Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, the influence of Zoroastrianism gave them a clear perception of the existence of incredible supernatural powers in the universe. This not only helped them understand the intervention of Ahura Mazda in human life, but also created an openness to the idea that the God of Israel, the one God of Judaism, could also be similarly intervening in this world. One of the unique features is that, although the Persian kings were not Jewish, they still profoundly respected the covenant between God and the people of Israel. For them, protecting and supporting the Jews was not a purely political decision, but an acknowledgement of a supreme power that was guiding the world, in which the people of Israel played an important role. Cyrus, the famous king of Persia, not only allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, but he also issued a decree allowing them to restore their culture and religion. This was not only a political move, but also a show of respect for the God of Israel, even though Cyrus was not a follower of Judaism. Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes may have seen themselves as instruments of Ahura Mazda, the supreme being they worshipped. So they saw their actions towards Israel as not just mere support, but part of God's grand divine plan. Thus, Cyrus's actions not only helped the Jews restore the temple in Jerusalem, but also showed the involvement of supernatural powers in human affairs. This makes us think about how the Persian kings, despite their different religions, could still participate in the fulfillment of prophecy and God's plans for the people of Israel. This opens up a new dimension to understanding God's intervention in history. It is an intervention that takes place not only at special sacred moments, but also through kings and empires who may not have been aware of themselves as God's instruments, but who nevertheless fulfilled His will. Despite being a pagan king, Cyrus became part of this grand plan, restoring Jerusalem, bringing the Jews back to their homeland, and opening a new page in the history of this people. So how did Zoroastrianism influence the important decisions in the history of Persia regarding Israel? In the light of this religion, the Persian kings may have seen the significant events of world history as the effects of a supernatural power. This power could guide and control the destinies of peoples. Although they were not Jewish, their respect for Ahura Mazda may have led them to act in a way that they perceived as right according to the will of the God of Israel. Throughout Persian history, kings like Cyrus did things that no one expected. They were not only great leaders of an empire, but also instruments of a greater plan, a plan that God had laid out long ago. And through this, we realize that throughout history, God can use anyone, whether king or sinner, to carry out His will. God's intervention does not always come through the means we understand, but through the steps He has prepared in advance. The actions of the Persian kings toward Israel are a living testament to this. Even though they were part of a pagan empire, they were able to make significant decisions that contributed to the restoration of the people of Israel, fulfilling God's promise. This story reminds us that, no matter the circumstances, God can use anyone to do His work in this world. Number 5. Persia's prophetic role in the end times. In Ezekiel's vision, Gog is described as the leader of a mighty confederacy that includes the nations of Magog, Persia, Cush, Gomer, and Beth Togarmah. Together, these nations will invade Israel during a time when the people of Israel are living in peace and security, having returned to their promised land. Among these nations, Persia stands out, as Ezekiel 38:5 identifies it as a major player in this final confrontation. Why does Persia, once an ally of Israel, appear in such a dark role in this prophetic battle? Historically, Persia has had both positive and negative relationships with Israel. In Old Testament times, the Persian Empire under King Cyrus played a key role in allowing the Jews to return to their homeland after the Babylonian exile. While Persia's role was not only political, it was also divinely appointed. Cyrus, called the Anointed of the Lord in Isaiah 45, was God's restoration instrument. However, in Ezekiel's prophecy, Persia's role changed. Iran, as Persia is now known, would align with the forces opposing Israel, contributing to the chaotic and dangerous environment described in Ezekiel's vision. Persia's role in this prophecy may seem puzzling, especially given the historical context of its relationship with Israel, but it serves as a clear reminder that God's purposes and plans unfold according to His will, not according to human understanding or allegiance. Persia's shift from a nation that once supported Israel to one that opposed Israel is part of a larger narrative about God's divine sovereignty over the affairs of nations. A modern reflection of Ezekiel's prophecy. Today's geopolitical landscape closely resembles the conditions described in Ezekiel's prophecy. Iran, once a key player in the Middle East with a complicated relationship with Israel, now finds itself at odds with the Jewish state. The tensions between Israel and Iran are well documented, as Iran has become a leading force opposing Israel's existence. Iran's support for militant groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, as well as its involvement in proxy wars in Syria, have exacerbated the conflict. Israel's security is constantly threatened by Iran's influence in the region, and these tensions offer a glimpse of what may happen in the last days. Ezekiel's prophecy appears to be playing out before our eyes. The coalition of nations led by Gog, widely understood to be Russia, may be a harbinger of the future, as Russia and Iran have grown closer in their opposition to Israel. The strategic cooperation between these two powers in the Middle East, especially in Syria, underscores that the stage is being set to fulfill this ancient prophecy. The tensions between Israel and its adversaries, including Iran, mirror the very events that Ezekiel foresaw more than 2,500 years ago. The role of God's intervention. One of the most striking aspects of Ezekiel's prophecy is the role of God's intervention. Despite the overwhelming odds against Israel, God promises to act on behalf of His people. He will supernaturally intervene, ensuring their victory and bringing glory to His name. In Ezekiel 38:18-23, God declares that He will send a great earthquake, panic, and chaos upon His enemies. He will fight on behalf of Israel, ensuring that those who oppose His covenant will not prevail. The prophecy clarifies that God is still sovereign even as the nations rise against Israel in this final war. No government, no alliance can thwart His plan. While the nations of Gog and Magog, including Persia, may believe they are acting of their own free will, they ultimately serve as instruments of God's judgment. The outcome of this war is already written, and it will end in the defeat of Israel's enemies and the glorification of Israel's God. The spiritual message in Ezekiel's prophecy is clear. God is in control. Even when the world seems to be falling into chaos, even when nations are rebelling against Israel, God is still sovereign, and His plans for His people will be fulfilled. The story of Persia's role in this conflict is a powerful reminder that God can use even the most unlikely nations to accomplish His purposes. A message of hope and restoration. While the prophecy of Gog and Magog may seem frightening, it is ultimately a story of hope. It is a restoration story, not just for Israel, but for the world. God's judgment on the nations is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. It is through judgment that God will bring redemption to His people. The defeat of Israel's enemies will set the stage for the coming of the Messiah, the ultimate deliverer who will bring peace to the world and restore Israel to its rightful place. For those who trust in God, the message of Ezekiel's prophecy is one of comfort and assurance. God's victory is inevitable, no matter how fierce the battle or the opposition. He has determined the outcome, and His people can rest knowing He will fight for them. The return of the Israelites to the earth, the conflict with Gog and Magog, and God's subsequent intervention are all part of God's plan to bring His people into fulfilling His promises. Ultimately, the role of Persia in Ezekiel's prophecy is a reminder that God uses every nation and every circumstance to accomplish His will. No matter how dark the times may seem, God is in control. His plan is unfolding, and His ultimate victory will bring peace to the world. The story of Persia in Ezekiel is a call to faith, trust, and hope, for God is faithful, and He will fulfill all that He has promised. Number 6, God's power and the final plan. Throughout history, we see clearly the presence of God's power beyond all limits. He is not only the Creator, but also the one who controls all nations and all significant events in this world. God directs the nations according to His long-predetermined plan of redemption. One of the clearest evidences of this power is His intervention in the history of Persia and the role of the Persian kings, who, although not believers in God, became instruments to carry out the great plan of redemption for Israel. Although Persia was a pagan empire that did not worship God, kings like Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes were used by God to perform miracles in His plan. God did not need the faith of those who worshipped Him to carry out His will. This fact shows that God's power is not limited by politics, religion, or any nation. He can use any tool He wants to achieve His purpose. A prominent example is the story of King Cyrus. Although he was a pagan king, God used him to allow the Israelites to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This is amazing because the prophecy of this event was foretold in Isaiah over 100 years before Cyrus was born. Isaiah 44 verse 28. This proves that God is not limited by time or space. His plan surpasses all human understanding and is carried out perfectly, even though we cannot foresee it. Darius, Cyrus's successor, also continued the work that Cyrus had begun. He not only authorized, but also financially supported the rebuilding of the temple. Artaxerxes, the next Persian king, continued this role, helping Nehemiah rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Through 3 Persian kings, God kept the plan of redemption for Israel alive through the generations, affirming that He was always present in every event of history. However, the wonder of God's power is not only demonstrated through the use of pagan kings to carry out His plans. God also accurately predicts and directs future events. In the book of Ezekiel, God prophesies a final war between Israel and the nations from the east, including Persia, now Iran. This prophecy describes the formation of a coalition of countries that will attack Israel in the end times, a coalition that Persia will join. Although Persia, Iran, and other nations will fight against Israel, the prophecy affirms that God will intervene in this war and protect the people of Israel. Although these nations will use their strength to attack, in the end, the victory will belong to God. He will be the ultimate victor, and the people of Israel will be protected. In this war, we see that God's power is still supreme, no matter how powerful the nations are. He will never let His plans be disrupted. Every event, great or small, in this world is in His hands. God will always control history, and no nation can change His plans. This prophecy of the final battle not only shows God's intervention in the coming times, but it also serves as a reminder to us of the greatness and majesty of God's power. Although the world may change, His intervention will never change. God is always in control, and in the end, He will bring victory to the people of Israel. Although Persia, as Iran will play a role in the future, will ally with other nations to fight against Israel, the ultimate victory will be God's. This reminds us that no matter what happens in the world, we need not worry. God will never abandon us, and He will protect us in all circumstances. The truth about Iran in the Bible is a profound subject and full of important lessons that we can learn from the prophecies. Although the name Iran does not appear directly in the Bible, the country has been known by other names, such as Persia and Elam. Biblical prophecies concerning Iran often concern the rise, fall, and restoration of the nation at key points in salvation history. I want to just preface this by saying, I have considered this a big expense and I'm not game. There's no regret necessary. But the Persian Empire, under the least expected nations and people to accomplish His great plans, while Iran may not be a nation that follows God today, the lesson here is that God can use the least expected nations and people to accomplish His great plans. Iran in the Bible is not only a picture of earthly power, but also a testament to God's love and justice, showing that even nations we see as enemies can have a role in His plan. Therefore, let us open our hearts to God's call for all peoples and live in hope for a better and peaceful future. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel to discover more profound lessons from the Bible and stories of nations in prophecy.